Hey everybody, welcome back to the Chaotic Little Book Corner. Are you guys ready to talk about identity? Because I am. I'm really ready to talk about identity. I have 4 books that I was sent from Europa Publishing. This has been a long-awaited video. This is my set of 4 books for review from Europa Publishing. I have Elena Ferrante, The Days of Abandonment. This is Deep in the Brain, Helmet Double, and this is about Parkinson's. Muriel Barbary, this is The Elegance of Hedgehogs. And Wendy Jones, this is The Thoughts and Happenings of Wilfred Price and the Purveyor of Superior Funerals. This is where my logic of identity comes in. Woman proposed to by a gentleman, barely knows him, says yes. But now what? Her identity is now fiancé, so what does that change? 2 women, one younger, believing that it's time to commit suicide because she doesn't really know what to do with the world. The other, older, forgotten, interests in deeper things, but pretends she's not because it's just easier. The mind in general with Parkinson's, losing identity, losing feeling, losing power, and madness and coming to grips with the identity of losing oneself as a wife. Now, so let's start this way. These 2 kind of balanced each other out in an interesting way. So what happens when you go from the identity of a single woman to taken, and what happens when you go from the identity of a taken woman to single? Now, I have never been married, so I cannot fathom what it would be like to lose the identity of being a married woman and becoming single. What I can attest to is what it feels like to be a woman who thought she was going to get married to a gentleman, to a woman who was single. And that identity I do understand. The identity of being single and then becoming somebody's significant other, I understand that. But what makes society put women in these 2 categories? We have very specific categories as women. We're either single or we're taken. And that's really interesting. And our whole persona is supposed to evolve and change and revolve around those 2 specific identities, which do revolve around males. Now, I'm not saying that to be a feminist or a strong, independent woman or anything of that nature, you need to be single. By no means. I think that a strong man can support a woman, can give her strength, can give her the opportunity to grow, can support her in growth and ideas and thoughts. But what happens when the identity of a woman becomes so wrapped up in a man that she loses herself? What happens when you become more obsessed with the idea of becoming someone's significant other than just being a human? Now, this one takes place in the year 1924. So in the year 1924, I can't tell you that the women were not just supposed to get married, because kind of that was their job. In the time period, it was before really the men had come home and the wars had changed everything. It was before women's movements. It was just around the time when voting had just begun to become a thing for women. So in actuality, a woman of this day and age waiting around to be proposed to was pretty normal. This one takes place. It does not give a date of a time period. It was published in 2002 in Italy. So let's go off the assumption that this book takes place in the same time period and idea. Was it different then? Did it shift? Because at that point, in those days, it was just around the time when social media was becoming a thing, when your identity was literally confirmed and denied on your social media. Like, I remember being in a relationship for 3 years and not being in a relationship on Facebook and feeling just devastated and absolutely betrayed by this guy. Granted, I was correct to feel that way, but at the same time, it shouldn't be, does the whole world know you're in a relationship? It should just be, are you in a relationship? Are you in a committed relationship? There's so many situations now where the identity is now wrapped up in social media and what the relationship looks like on social media that it's shifted the whole thing. Now, what about this kind of identity? What happens when your identity begins to falter? When you begin to lose identity? When you begin to feel like your identity has stopped? And this was such an interesting story. Just one, deep in the brain. What happens when you lose you? When you lose yourself, your identity, your self-worth, your self-value? What happens when the intrinsic things that you've always put yourself as begin to fade? Everything shifts. Everything changes. Everything you know and love about you begins to go. Oh. Ugh. That sucks. Like, I struggle with identity because of my DID, but I at least know I'm kind. I at least know I can read a full book. I at least remember words. My grandfather has Parkinson's, and has had times where he can't remember how to play the piano. He's been playing since he was 7. That one really gets me. And then here, the identity of a 16-year-old versus the identity of a full-grown woman. When does a child become a woman? And when does a woman become too old in society? Does she become too old? Does she become something that people don't want to become? Does she become something people aspire to become? What makes the older woman great, and what makes the younger woman decide to stay? Identity is wrapped in so many different little layers. It's wrapped in personal appearance. It's wrapped in personal experience. It's wrapped in education, clothing, status. Everyone has a different way of defining their identity. How do I identify? I identify as a 26-year-old female who is working as a booktuber, who is working to silence and stop the stigma of mental illness while coping and learning to live with dissociative identity disorder. I would identify, if you asked me 5 describing words, I would say I am smart, loyal, kind, genuine, and I got 4. You guys might have more. I don't know. If you ask me to describe my identity look-wise, the way that people always explain me when I would work in retail and somebody would ask, "Who are you looking for?" They'd always say, the blonde. Yeah, thanks. My boobs. My boobs define me, apparently. My boobs are an identity. Whatever. I identify as a sister, as a daughter, as a cousin. I hope to someday identify as a mother, as a wife. I can't say that I have any hope in identifying as a specific career. It's not that I don't have career aspirations. My intrinsic value, my identity, my feeling of self-worth increases when I am holding a child. Though I've never had my own, I feel more in tune with myself as a person when I'm holding a child than I do any other time. So for me, how do you identify yourself? What makes you identify? I really got from Europa that these books, they all touch on mental illness. But do I identify a person with mental illness as their illness, or do we identify as them as a person with that mental illness who is living life with an identity? I think the stigma begins when you start to identify a person as their illness and not as their human self. Kind of like deformity, when you start to identify a person by what's exteriorly different, you take away their personal identity, and that's inappropriate. I can't speak for every human on the planet. I can't. But I don't think every person with a difference wants to be identified purely on their difference. And that's it. And then the rest of their qualities and ideas and values and intrinsic self-worth goes out the window. I don't think that's actually how anyone wants to do that. So, down below, what's your identity? I want to know you guys. I want to get to know my subscribers. I want to talk about your identities. How do you identify yourself? When did you learn your identity? Have you figured it out yet? I still struggle with it daily, but that's because some days I wake up and I'm a different identity, literally. But that's me. Let's talk. I don't think this was the way that I planned to do the Europa review, but it was kind of the way that it went after I looked at all the books and how they overlapped and where my mind was. And regardless of the fact that there was some forms of madness and mental illness to all of them, identity, that was the string that kind of got me thinking through all of them. So I'm happy I read them. I enjoyed all of them. I'm happy to own them. And I'm excited to continue with Europa in the future. I will see you guys in my next video.